21. The age when the world should be laid at your feet, brimming with endless possibilities. For Ethan Donovan, a tired-eyed archaeology student, things were different. His world had narrowed down to stacks of excavated artifacts, the scent of ancient soil, and a ceaseless, draining battle against chronic sleep deprivation that blurred the lines between reality and fiction. Lately, this struggle had escalated, morphing into a full-scale war for his sanity. It all started months ago during his summer field practice, while his group was excavating beneath one of Lower Manhattan's oldest churches. They were looking for colonial settlements, but Ethan found something else. Deep beneath the foundation, in what seemed like an ancient crypt or storage space, he unearthed a small, strangely shaped box. The one he now mentally called the Lament Box. It was not made of wood or metal, but of something resembling pressed, hardened skin, covered in intricate, looping patterns. The moment his fingers touched its cold, almost living surface, a strange, electric jolt ran through his body, making him snatch his hand away. For a few seconds, he thought he heard a whisper, not in the room, but inside his skull, a quiet, winding sound promising forgotten horrors. He told no one. Now, he knew that was his first mistake. A relentless, drizzling rain hung over New York again, washing the grime from the pavement and blurring neon signs into streaks of color. Ethan sat in his cramped dorm room, struggling to focus on his notes, but the words swam before his eyes. His old roommate had moved out, and Ethan desperately needed a new place. He found an ad online, a room in the Lower East Side, priced strangely low. The photos were vague, but promised space and relative quiet. The meeting with the landlord was set for the following morning. He informed his mother, Sarah, about the meeting. As always, she was anxious about him living alone in the sprawling city. "Don't forget to call me afterward, honey, and be careful." Her voice on the phone was filled with the maternal worry Ethan had grown accustomed to. He had no idea how prophetic her words would be. That night, Ethan fell into a sleep so vivid it was indistinguishable from wakefulness. He stood before an ancient, dark brick townhouse, seemingly lifted straight out of a black and white photograph of old New York. The incessant rain poured down, and the light from the street lamps spread across puddles, reflecting distorted shadows. The door opened, and the landlord appeared. He was tall, gaunt, with sparse, slick-back hair and unnaturally pale skin. His smile was too wide, his eyes too empty. "Come in, Ethan," he whispered, his voice sounding like wine through old pipes, drawn out and chilling. Ethan stepped inside. The house was decrepit. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of mold and something bitter, metallic. Wooden floors creaked under his feet, and the shadows cast by the furniture seemed alive, their long claws reaching out in the gloom. The landlord guided him past a small living room, showed him the kitchen, and then the room that was supposed to be his. It was empty, with a single window viewing the gray rain. There were strange stains on the walls, resembling dried blood, but Ethan dismissed the thought. "The basement, by the way, is down there," the man said, pointing toward a wooden door beneath the stairs leading upstairs. "But you shouldn't go down. Just old utilities." It was then that Ethan felt a surge of rising panic. Not from the words, but from the man's gaze, which held a wild, predatory glee. Ethan realized it was a trap. He tried to back away, but it was too late. The landlord violently shoved him in the back. Ethan tumbled down the stairs leading into the dark basement. He felt the steps scraping his skin, the impact on his head, and then only pain and cold. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the wet, earthy floor. The man stood above him, his face twisted in a malicious grin. In his hand, he held a rope. "You've come home, Ethan," he hissed, and his eyes glowed red. Ethan tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The man leaned down, his breath smelling of decay, and began tying him to an old, metal bed frame standing in the corner of the basement. The ropes dug into his skin, and around Ethan, shadows began to stir, stretching and weaving themselves into malevolent shapes. He saw their eyes, burning, red pinpricks in the utter darkness. The sleep killer was near. He woke up, bolted upright, covered in cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was just a dream, just a dream. But the sensation of sticky fear, the ache of the ropes, the stench of the basement, it all felt so intensely real, as if he had just escaped a maniac's clutches. He tried to calm down, taking several deep breaths. He grabbed his phone to check the time, 7:15 a.m., and immediately saw a new message. From his mother, Sarah. "I have a strange feeling. Don't go to that guy, he's bad." Ethan froze. A chill ran down his spine, far worse than the nightmare itself. It couldn't be a coincidence. His mother had never sent him a message like that before any meeting. Her words, her intuition, and this dream, so vivid, so prophetic. It was a sign, a clear, unmistakable sign. He never met the man. The room rental never happened. But Ethan did not yet know that, by avoiding one threat, he had unwittingly opened the door to something far older and more terrible, something that had already entered his life through the Lament Box beneath the old church. The sheer terror left by the prophetic nightmare and his mother's text was so intense that Ethan didn't even respond to the landlord's follow-up message. He simply deleted all their correspondence. But the need for shelter persisted. 2 days later, exhausted from lack of sleep, Ethan found a room in Harlem. It was an apartment rented by an elderly woman, Mrs. Rhodes. The building was old but tidy, and most importantly, located on the 4th floor, far from any basement. The room was small but bright, overlooking a typical fire escape. He moved quickly, hoping the new environment would help him shed the burden of the last few months. But he was wrong. The Lament Box, which Ethan kept stashed in his backpack, seemed to emit an invisible yet palpable pressure. Since he touched it, it had become nearly impossible to sleep. If before it was simple insomnia, now it was a painful marathon. The first few nights in the new apartment were worse than anything he had experienced. He would lie down at 2 in the morning, close his eyes, and immediately feel his consciousness tighten like a string. Instead of sleep, hypnagogic panic arrived, a state between waking and sleep filled with nightmarish visions. He saw shadows moving across the ceiling, even though the light was off. He heard whispering that sounded like a whirlwind of a million voices speaking at once about his mistakes, his guilt, and his fear. "You haven't felt the pain. You must feel it. You deserve it." These thoughts weren't his. They were alien, cruel, and they forced him to clench his jaw until it ached. Ethan realized this was the influence of the artifact, but now this influence had a voice and a clear, manipulative goal. This was the sleep killer. One morning, looking in the bathroom mirror, Ethan saw that he looked as if he were 40 years old. His eyes were deeply sunken, with dark, blue bags beneath them. But the worst part, on his right arm, where he had touched the box, there was a thin, almost invisible stripe of a perfectly straight cut. He didn't remember it happening. He felt no pain. It looked like a surgical incision, made by an unknown hand while he was half asleep. It was the first physical evidence that the sleep killer was beginning to act. Chronic sleep deprivation began to erode his life. He couldn't concentrate at the university. During a lecture on ancient history, he suddenly saw Professor Smith's face distort. The skin seemed to melt away, revealing a black, hardened surface underneath, and his eyes turned into 2 burning red dots. Ethan jumped up, pushing his chair back, and ran out of the lecture hall, breathing heavily. When he stopped in the corridor, his heart was pounding. No one paid attention. Professor Smith continued speaking. "It's a hallucination," Ethan told himself. "It's just sleep deprivation." But he knew it wasn't. It was the sleep killer, showing him what it could do to the people around him. The demon was preparing the ground. In the evening, when he returned to his room, his eyes immediately fell on the Lament Box. It was lying under the bed. Ethan picked it up. The cold it radiated felt unnatural. He turned it in his hands, examining the complex, interwoven patterns that now seemed not just ornamentation, but maps to his own madness. He felt an impulse, a wild, unbearable desire to open it, despite it having no visible locks. Ethan stared at his reflection in the mirror, his face a roadmap of sleep deprivation and terror. The thin, straight cut on his forearm was throbbing, a silent accusation. But the blood, the real, sticky blood from Mrs. Rhodes, was on his hands. It was on the collar of his shirt. He hadn't called the police. The moment the thought formed, the metallic whisper of the sleep killer filled his head. Go ahead. They will believe the sleep-deprived student who beat an old woman. They will lock you away. You will be alone. And then I will have you completely. The entity was right. No one would believe him. His only chance lay in the source of the evil, the Lament Box. He had to understand what he had touched, and more importantly, how to destroy it or neutralize it. He carefully cleaned the blood from his clothes and his room, moving with the cold, precise efficiency that came with utter despair. Then he gathered the box, wrapped it tightly in a thick wool scarf, and hid it deep inside his backpack. The rain was still falling when he arrived at the university. He bypassed his classes and went straight to the history department offices. Professor Smith, the same man whose face had melted into a demonic mask days earlier, was at his desk, grading papers. He was a meticulous man, his office filled with ancient texts and the dry, comforting smell of old paper. Ethan, you look dreadful. Haven't slept in weeks. Professor Smith looked up, his expression a mix of concern and academic annoyance. Professor, I found something during the summer dig. Something unusual. I need your expertise. It's urgent, Ethan stammered, pulling the wrapped object from his bag. He carefully placed the Lament Box on the professor's desk, peeling back the scarf just enough to reveal the unsettling, skin-like surface and the looping patterns. Professor Smith's eyes, however, did not hold the usual bored curiosity. They widened slightly, and a flicker of something ancient, recognition, perhaps fear, crossed his features. He didn't touch it, but leaned closer. Where exactly did you find this, Ethan? He asked, his voice low and devoid of his usual academic joviality. Under the foundation of the old St. Jude's Church, in that sealed crypt area. I thought it was just a piece of primitive folk art. Smith pushed his glasses up. This is not folk art, Ethan. This is old, very old, and it's not from any known civilization we were studying. Look at the material. It's not truly leather. It's chitinous. And these markings, he pointed to a specific sequence of the interwoven patterns. These aren't decorative. They're script, pre-human, possibly Proto-Sumerian, but corrupted. These symbols denote a contract, a binding. Ethan's heart pounded. A contract for what? For exchange. This is linked to the concept of the Noctis Consumptor, the night consumer, an entity that doesn't just steal sleep. It uses the deprivation to break down the mind, making the host vulnerable to its primary goal, violence and self-destruction. Smith paused, looking directly at Ethan's bloodshot eyes. Legends say the night consumer doesn't need to possess its victim completely. It needs a small, constant flow of extreme psychological torment to build enough power to manifest fully. The host becomes an architect of their own nightmares, and eventually, the nightmares of others. It forces them to hurt themselves or others to feed on the sheer terror. Ethan thought of the straight cut on his arm, of the red eyes in the mirror, of Mrs. Rhodes lying bleeding on the cold floor. The description matched perfectly. Is there a name? Ethan managed to ask, his voice hoarse. The binding script suggests it's called the Sleep Killer, a modern translation of an ancient title. It was supposedly sealed away by early religious zealots who buried it, hoping the stone and sanctity would starve it. How do I stop it? Smith finally reached out, hesitantly touching the scarf. These bindings are weakened. You must have broken the seal just by touching it. To destroy the box, you need two things. Iron, pure, smelted iron, for physical disruption, and something that cancels its power, a symbol of waking will. He looked nervously at the door, then whispered. I remember an old text mentioning that the seal was created using a piece of petrified wood that was once part of the church's altar, imbued with constant prayer. It was split into two pieces. One was used to bind the box. The other should be hidden somewhere near where you found the box. Probably in the church itself. You need to find the other piece and use it to break the box. Before Ethan could ask another question, the lights in Smith's office flickered rapidly, plunging the room into darkness, illuminated only by the gray light of the rainy afternoon. From the dark corner of the office, a whispering voice, not in his head, but in the room itself, roared with fury. You shouldn't have asked. He shouldn't have told you. Now you both pay the price. Ethan's breath hitched. Smith fumbled for a flashlight, but before he could find it, a heavy, dusty book flew off the top shelf, striking the professor square in the temple with sickening force. Smith collapsed instantly, a dark stain rapidly blooming on the old carpet. The light snapped back on. The Lament Box on the desk was vibrating, pulsing with the red glow of the symbols. Ethan saw his chance. He grabbed the box, shoved it back into his bag, and fled, leaving Professor Smith unconscious, or worse, a casualty of his own cursed investigation. Ethan was now a fugitive. He had assaulted his landlady and likely severely injured his professor. The sleep killer was no longer merely manipulating him. It was actively using him as an instrument of destruction. He ran out into the constant downpour, the heavy rain masking his tears and the frantic pounding of his heart. His feet led him instinctively towards St. Jude's Church, the place where the nightmare began. He knew what he had to do: find the second piece of the petrified wood seal. The church was old, intimidating, with Gothic arches that seemed to sag under the weight of the rain. It was closed for renovations, but Ethan remembered a maintenance entrance in the back, near the construction site where they had excavated. The sleep killer was relentless. Now, the entity communicated in a constant stream of hateful commands, attempting to force Ethan to stop. Go home. End the suffering. Take the knife and finish the job you started on the old woman. It will be quiet. You will sleep. Ethan fought back, leaning on the only thing he had left: the waking will, the sheer, stubborn determination to stay awake and alive long enough to stop the demon. He slipped through the maintenance door. The air inside the church was cold, thick with the smell of dust, damp plaster, and a faint, acrid scent that reminded him of the box. Using his phone as a flashlight, he navigated the darkened nave. He went directly to the construction area, which was now covered by a temporary wooden floor. He lifted a loose panel. Below, the pit where the crypt entrance was located yawned. Smith had mentioned the altar. Ethan scanned the ruins. The original altar was gone, replaced by a temporary wooden table draped with a cloth. But close to the sealed pit, he saw a section of very old, petrified wood embedded in the floor, the remnant of the ancient altar's foundation. He knelt down, desperately running his fingers along the cold, stone hardwood. He felt a small, almost imperceptible groove. His fingers dug into the dust, following the line of the groove, until he felt a small, wooden object wedged deeply into the crack. It was a piece of petrified wood about the size of a cigarette lighter, the other half of the seal. It was warm to the touch, and the moment he grasped it, the chaotic noise in his head, the million whispers of the sleep killer, suddenly diminished. A terrifying, high-pitched scream, not human, but like the grinding of metal against bone, reverberated through the church. The demon was reacting. Suddenly, a heavy metal grate from the floor above crashed down, narrowly missing Ethan's head, shattering the temporary wooden cover. Give it back. It belongs here. I belong with you. The sleep killer howled, its voice filling the entire space, distorting and cracking the stained glass windows. Ethan realized his mistake. He was now exactly where the demon wanted him to be, alone, trapped, and holding the only key to his own destruction. The ancient crypt beneath the church had been hastily excavated, but never fully explored. Now, it was the stage for the final act. Ethan scrambled down into the pit, the Lament Box feeling impossibly heavy in his backpack, and a small piece of petrified wood clutched tightly in his bleeding hand. He reached the cold, earthen floor of the crypt. It was pitch black, save for the weak beam of his phone. The space was claustrophobic, the ceiling low and supported by crumbling stone columns. The air was colder here, saturated with the smell of centuries of damp earth and decay. The sleep killer decided to discard subtlety. It manifested. It wasn't a shadow or a figure in a cloak. It was a distortion of the space itself. The darkness deepened, and the air crystallized. Ethan saw movement, not a body, but of the void folding in on itself. Then, it focused on the corner of the crypt, taking shape from the remnants of fear and guilt Ethan had carried. It materialized as the man from the nightmare, the gaunt, pale-skinned landlord with the impossibly wide, grinning mouth. But now, the skin was taut, chitinous, and his eyes were pure, swirling crimson energy. "You brought me home, Ethan," the figure hissed, its voice echoing, multiplied by the stone. "You gave me the pain. You gave me the violence. The lament box is ready to be opened, and you are ready to be my vessel." The demon raised a hand. The walls of the crypt began to weep thick, black fluid. The darkness was absolute, save for the demon's eyes and the faint glow of the box in Ethan's bag. "Give me the box and the peace. We become one." Ethan, despite the agony of the weeks without sleep, felt a surge of adrenaline fueled by pure defiance. He clutched the piece of petrified wood. "You took my sleep. You made me hurt people. I won't let you out." Ethan screamed, his voice raw. He quickly pulled the lament box from his bag. The box was now radiating heat, almost burning his hands. The instructions were iron for physical disruption, petrified wood for the cancellation of its power. Ethan remembered the iron. Lying nearby, forgotten by the construction crew, was a heavy, rusty crowbar. With a speed born of desperation, Ethan lunged for the crowbar. The sleep killer reacted instantly, a wave of pure psychic noise hitting Ethan. He fell, writhing on the ground, his ears ringing as the demon tried to flood his mind with the screams of Mrs. Rhodes and the image of Professor Smith's bloody face. "Kill yourself. End it. You are worthless." Ethan ignored the mental assault. He reached the crowbar, gripping the cold, rusty metal. He didn't have time to be precise. He took the small piece of petrified wood, the symbol of waking will, and placed it firmly against the side of the lament box. Then, using the crowbar, he brought down all his remaining strength onto the box. Crunch! The sound was not of breaking wood or metal. It was a sound like a wet, sickening tear. The box split open, revealing nothing inside but a column of swirling, black vapor that smelled like ozone and burnt hair. The demon shrieked, a deafening, agonizing sound of utter failure and dissolution. The visual manifestation of the sleep killer began to unravel. Its pale skin cracked, and the red eyes faded into the darkness. The black vapor surged out of the broken box, straight towards Ethan, attempting a final, desperate possession. But the petrified wood, pressed against the fissure, acted as a counterseal. The vapor hit the wood and retracted, recoiling back into the remnants of the broken box. The light returned, dimmer but real. The sound stopped. The air went cold and still. Ethan was left on his knees, panting, the remains of the lament box smoking beside him. He looked at the crowbar. He had done it. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. Ethan didn't wait. He dropped the crowbar and stumbled out of the crypt, leaving the shattered box behind. Outside, the incessant rain had finally stopped. The air felt clean, but the city was not cleansed. He had saved himself, and possibly others, from the demon's immediate grasp, but he hadn't escaped the consequences. He immediately called for an ambulance for Professor Smith, giving an anonymous tip about an accident. He also called the police anonymously about a disturbance at Mrs. Rhodes's apartment, saying he heard a fall. Days later, he was safe, back in his old dorm room, miraculously vacant. Mrs. Rhodes was recovering in the hospital from a concussion. Professor Smith had a serious head injury, but was expected to recover. Ethan was interviewed by the NYPD. His appearance, the extreme sleep deprivation, the cuts on his arm, made him an unreliable witness, but they had no physical evidence linking him to the scene other than the anonymous tips. They chalked it up to stress and exhaustion. He finally slept, deeply, but his sleep was not peaceful. In his last dream, he was walking along a subway track deep beneath the city. He saw the black, earthen floor of the crypt again, but this time, the lament box was gone. Instead, on the tunnel wall, he saw a newly formed graffiti, perfectly straight and clear, despite the moisture. I'm not in a box anymore, Ethan. I am the cracks. And the city still sleeps. Ethan woke up, sweat prickling his skin. The sleep killer was not destroyed, it was dispersed. The ultimate form of a parasitic entity. He had broken the box, but he had released the demon into the infrastructure of New York, into the cracks of the city. He looked at the clock. 4:30 a.m. And then he noticed the new cut on his left leg, perfectly straight, almost imperceptible. He hadn't felt a thing. The sleep may have returned, but the war, he realized, had just begun. He was no longer the host. He was the hunter, forced to remain awake, knowing that the demon he released was waiting for the entire city to fall asleep.